On the night of December 16, 1773, 92,000 pounds of tea were systematically hauled onto decks and thrown into Boston Harbor. This was not a spontaneous riot. It was a cold, calculated strike against a corporate monopoly. The crisis was driven by corporate panic. By 1773, the British East India Company was on the verge of bankruptcy. This chart shows why. Their revenue was plunging because American colonists were choosing smuggled Dutch tea over the company's higher-priced legal product. To save the company, Parliament passed the Tea Act. The law granted the East India Company a monopoly to sell directly to the colonies, which allowed them to slash the legal price of tea until it was actually cheaper than the smuggled Dutch competition. But the lower price contained a hidden catch. Parliament deliberately kept the 3-pence Townshend tax active within this new, cheaper rate. It was a final assertion of the Crown's absolute authority over the colonies. If the colonists bought the discounted tea, they would be tricked into a legal precedent. By paying the cheaper price, they would implicitly accept Parliament's right to tax them without any representation. The colonists recognized the maneuver immediately. They launched a coordinated PR campaign through newspaper broadsides, urging citizens to boycott the East India Company and drink domestic Labrador tea instead. Resistance formed a united front across the coast. In New York and Philadelphia, protesters successfully pressured incoming tea ships to turn around and sail back to England before they could even dock. But in Boston, Royal Governor Thomas Hutchinson refused to yield. Despite the mounting protests, he ordered the tea ships to stay docked at the wharf until the cargo was landed. Hutchinson's refusal to let the ships leave created a dangerous bottleneck. The cargo was now stuck between a determined colonial boycott and an unbending British administration. The standoff officially began when the merchant ship Dartmouth docked at Griffin's Wharf, followed shortly by the Eleanor and the Beaver. Under British customs law, the arrival of a ship triggered a specific deadline. The crew had exactly 20 days to unload the cargo and pay the required duties. If the tea remained past day 20, customs officials were legally required to confiscate it and enforce the tax. While the days ticked away, Samuel Adams led mass meetings at the Old South Meeting House, demanding the ships be sent back. The law left no room for compromise. The colonists couldn't allow the tea to land, and the governor wouldn't let the ships leave. With the deadline hours away, destroying the cargo was the only way to stop the tax from becoming legally permanent. December 16, 1773, was day 20. Diplomacy had failed, and by the next morning, the Crown would have the legal authority to seize the tea. That evening, a group of up to 130 men prepared to board the ships. Many of them donned Mohawk or Narragansett Native American disguises before heading to the wharf. The soot used to blacken their faces served a vital practical purpose. It obscured their identities from British officials, protecting the participants from a certain charge of treason. The native dress also carried a symbolic weight. By casting off their European clothing, the men were signaling that they were no longer British subjects, but independent Americans. This wasn't a drunken mob. It was a disciplined strike executed by men who knew that their success depended on remaining anonymous and organized. Under the cover of darkness, the men boarded the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. The operation was conducted with surgical precision. The men smashed open over 340 chests of tea, but they took care not to damage the ships themselves or touch any other private property. For 3 hours, the only sounds were the cracking of wooden chests and the splash of tea hitting the water. By the time they were finished, the entire shipment had been dumped into the harbor. The restraint shown during the operation helped win the subsequent PR battle. Eyewitnesses noted that the men even swept the decks afterward, and the Boston Gazette later reported that the town was almost universally congratulating each other. By destroying only the tea, they neutralized the tax trap without turning their own neighbors against them. The financial loss to the East India Company was massive, nearly 9,650 pounds in a single night. In today's currency, that is more than $1.7 million. John Adams recognized the magnitude of the event immediately. He wrote in his diary that the destruction was so bold and daring that it marked a definitive epoch in history. Parliament responded with the Intolerable Acts. They closed Boston's port and stripped its self-government, attempting economic strangulation, but this backfired. Instead of isolating Massachusetts, the retaliation terrified the other 12 colonies, convincing them their own rights were next.
This shared fear created a new sense of continental unity, leading directly to the First Continental Congress, where the colonies began to coordinate a unified resistance. What began as a corporate bailout and a 3-penny tax had pushed the colonies to a point of no return. Less than 2 years later, this property dispute would culminate in the first shots of the American Revolutionary War.